has left. He's gone to Bespin. The Empire has baited him in, which is exactly what Vader was trying to do. So we'll move on to the big reveal. And the reveal is that he is the son of Skywalker. Now, again, as you're watching this, when Palpatine and Vader are talking and they're saying, yes, he's the son of Skywalker, and Vader says it's impossible, and we're sitting there going, well, of course he's the son of Skywalker. He's Luke Skywalker. We know that much. And Anakin, he was a great Jedi. We know about that. But the big reveal is that Vader is Anakin. So we get to Bespin, and Luke is fighting him, and it's interesting in that the Emperor wants Luke because he's already knows how the Sith work. If he can get a new Anakin that's not cybernetic and having to deal with all that stuff, this is a great day for Palpatine. And Vader is thinking, if I can get another Anakin, we can take the Emperor out. So they're both thinking the same thing, which is they want Luke for more power. And it's just very interesting that the bad guys are pitted against each other. We don't quite realize it yet if you're just watching 4, 5, and 6. But if you're watching 1 through up to this point, Anakin's already talked about overthrowing Palpatine. He was talking about it back in episode 3 with Padme. Yeah. And so now he's thinking, wow, we can really make this work. And so they're drawing Luke in for the same reason, but for very different reasons all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it goes right along with the rule of 2, right? Like with the Sith apprentice eventually trying to take out the master. Yeah. But you also kind of wonder how if because obviously Vader knows now that Palpatine lied to him, right? Like, somehow Padme gave birth, right, to his child, and so you have to wonder how much that plays into it too. Of like, oh, okay, so this thing that you roped me in with, you lied about it, so. You do wonder if there's some anger and bitterness that comes out of that. It's also part of, I'm going to overthrow you and I'm just going to get Luke to help me. So it's hard to know because obviously this none of that was in motion when this scene took place, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. I really like it thinking about it from that way. Like it's almost a race to get Luke at this point. And episode 6 hits on it as well, big time when you're on that second Death Star.
One of the really cool things about this scene I hadn't thought about until we were watching it through this way is like, this is really kind of the beginning of, in a weird way, of Anakin's resurrection and redemption apart from Vader, right? Because to make this appeal to Luke to say, I'm your father, that's Anakin, right? Like, he has to somehow go back to being Anakin to say, I'm your father, right? Because Vader has been very clear that he killed off Anakin, right? He tells Kenobi that in Kenobi, I killed Anakin Skywalker. He and Palpatine talk about Anakin as a third person, right? Like, he's not in the room. They do. And so for all intents and purposes, Vader is this other person that now exists in the body of Anakin Skywalker. We talked about it in episode 3 where Anakin Skywalker would have never hurt Padme, right? But he nearly kills her on Mustafar because he's someone different now. But in this scene, to be able to say, Luke, I'm your father. That's who I am. That's Anakin Skywalker, right? And so a little bit of Anakin is being resurrected back in Vader to be able to say that, which is going to set this course for him to be able to come back in a bigger capacity. And so I think it's really cool that it was his love for family, right, for Padme, that made him make these drastic changes that pulled him away from the light. But now here's this other family that's going to pull Anakin back out and start pulling him back away from the dark. So it's a really cool mirror in an opposite direction of kind of what happened with Padme. And I hadn't thought about that until watching through from this lens of going through the story.
No, that's for sure. Luke's existence is the straw that breaks the camel's back for sure, because it is, like you said, it's what starts to reel Vader back in. And this movie, pretty early on, once you get that reveal that he's the son of Skywalker, that's really the turning point for Vader, because it messes with his head, because he's saying that can't be true, and of course it's the search your feelings, you know it to be true, and then they get on Bespin, and Vader and Luke have that fight, and I love that lightsaber duel. It's so good. It takes you obviously through different scenes, you see Vader is not just fighting with a saber, but he's throwing objects at Luke. He's messing with Luke's head. He's just trying to freeze Luke and carbonite at first too. So
Yeah.
he's not even wanting to kill Luke. He wants Luke alive.
Yeah.
And obviously there's motives to that, but we see a different Vader than the one that fought Obi-Wan Kenobi on the Death Star. And obviously he lobs Luke's hand off, and then he makes his plea to Luke. He's
Yeah.
looking at him, and he starts this question, which is the mental messing with Luke of,
Yeah.
Obi-Wan never told you about your father. And that's where it starts. Obviously the greatest scene in cinema history, probably. Everyone knows this one. Even
Yeah.
Trekkies know what's going on when it's when it's
Yeah.
coming to this. So
Yeah.
you get that big reveal, and kind of like what we said before, a few episodes ago, like how cool would it be to watch this as an adult having no clue? I don't think it's possible for someone to do that at this stage of entertainment. But how cool would it be for someone just to be sitting there and have zero clue about what was about to happen?
Yeah.
I would love for 1980 just to be able to sit in the theaters and see people react to that.
Yeah, the shock factor. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I remember when I first found that out, I was like, I mean, it is. It's like, because you assume he's lying, right? When he's like, "No, I'm your father," you're like, well, he's playing a game here. Like something's up. But then they keep running with it. And then Luke's like, "Dang, it is true, right?" And he's like lamenting that Ben never told him, and is like, "Wait a second, this is a real thing. Like this is
Yeah.
really his." And so even after it happens, you're kind of in a state of disbelief that it's like Vader's up to something, right? Like he's just messing with Luke. He's trying to recruit him. But then it sinks in kind of the same way for it does for Luke. It sinks in for the viewer. It's like, oh, this is actually true, right? And so if you hadn't seen 1 through 3, it's a pretty pretty big revelation that does take you a second to process. But
Yep.
yeah, it'd be fun
And
to go back and watch people see that.
I wish there was, obviously if you had cell phones at the time and you could just watch people going, oh, no way, because like
Yeah,
the big theater reveal for us in Star Wars, as sad as it is like my strongest Star Wars reaction is laughing at that Rey and Ben Solo kiss at the end of episode 9. That is the strongest in theater
that was
reaction I've had to Star Wars, because I wasn't
mm,
around for the originals, and what was going to happen in the prequels
yeah,
we kind of knew to an extent because we had seen 4 through 6. So I
yeah.
envy the people that got to watch that live. It's just such a cool thing
Oh
to
man,
think about. But yeah, it's a big scene because, like you said, Vader has to acknowledge Anakin at this point.
yeah,
And so Vader makes this plea to Luke, join me and we can take down the Emperor. And that is a straight up parallel to episode 3, where he's calling on Padme, hey, join me. We can take down the Emperor, calling out to another family member, going to try to do the same thing, and he gets the exact same result as he does in episode 3.
yeah,
Luke would rather fall down a shaft into a city that floats than, join Vader. He chooses death essentially
yeah,
over succumbing to the dark side, which is where we see he's not Anakin. He's the better version of Anakin at this point, because when Anakin's tempted with it, he joins for the power. When Luke is at his lowest and tempted, I would rather fall through a garbage chute than
yeah.
do that. So that's a big character
It is.
moment
Yeah,
for Luke.
yeah, and that's ultimately what's going to continue to allow him to be a player, right? That's what Obi-Wan and Yoda were worried about, is this exact moment where he has this opportunity to say, "Oh, we can wipe out the Emperor together," right? Like, here's a
Sounds pretty good.
yeah, let's do that. And it speaks too to the Emperor, like how evil and really awful he is, that nobody wants to follow him, right? But
Yeah.
he just digs his tendrils into people. I mean, Dooku did the same thing. He's like, listen, we can take him out together, right? Like, nobody wants to follow this guy, but he's so manipulative and so convincing, like that people just fall into that, and then they don't see another way out, right? And so everybody that's following him, their only way out is like, I got to get help to take this guy down. And
Yeah,
so it's kind of a repeated pattern with people under Palpatine, is that they don't have a way out, right? And so you see that repeat again, Anakin twice, Dooku once, but that's, I mean, it speaks to how truly evil and deceiving and manipulative, Palpatine really is.
for sure. Another thing is in how Luke is the better version of Anakin
Hmm.
is that
Yeah,
with the Jedi the connections are an issue. And so that's ultimately Anakin's undoing when his family is he chooses family over everything else and it causes essentially the whole galaxy to unravel.
yeah,
But when Luke, who raised as an orphan, and he's aware that he was raised as an orphan,
yeah,
and then he gets that father like figure, obviously not a great one, but hey, this is your flesh and blood right here, the last one alive. And he's not caught up enough to even consider that either. I think that's a pretty cool picture because Anakin does everything wrong when it comes to his flesh and blood, and Luke
yeah,
is more in tune with fighting the good fight and what's right versus needing this sense of approval, this sense of belonging, this sense of whatever that Anakin fell to. Luke's nowhere close to that at this point. Now he flirts
yeah.
with it in episode 6 a lot more,
Right.
but at this point when he had barely been trained, he doesn't even fall into it.
Yeah, and two, we see, because it's kind of a big theme in parts of Star Wars, but this family that's grown up around him, right? And so
Mhm.
for him to join Vader is further endangering the people that are now his family. And so Vader's flesh and blood, but one thing Anakin didn't really have is a group of people who were on his side, right? Like you had Obi-Wan who wanted to, but he didn't know how to, right? Like he
Yeah,
didn't understand how to help Anakin. He would have if he could have, but he just didn't know how. He didn't understand what Anakin's issue was. So really, Anakin had Padme, who he was 100% sure was going to die. Um, but that's not the case with Luke, right? Like Luke has something else other than Vader, other than what that pull is, that's gonna that helps him keep on that side of, you know what, there's other things that I have to fight for that are not just vengeance, that are not just defeating an enemy. And so I think part of it is he's acknowledging, like, there are other things that I can't sacrifice to join you. And
yep,
that's, again, that's something Anakin didn't have. Anakin kind of got to the point where he didn't have anything to lose. All he had to lose was Padme, and he wasn't willing to. So that it is an interesting parallel where we see just the circumstances around Anakin and Luke being so different that allow them to make better decisions or worse decisions.
for sure, for sure. And I like how this movie ends. So the big reveal is that Vader is
Yeah,
Anakin. Vader's Luke's father. If you're watching 1 through 5, you know that. But the big reveal for if you're a 1 through 5 watching through this point is that Luke isn't the same. And that's kind of our big reveal is that he's the opposite of what Anakin does. So that's cool. I like how it ends where you see the force telekinesis or whatever, where they're talking to each other. We see all the remaining Skywalkers. Luke's talking to Leia. Luke's talking to Vader
yeah,
also at the end of it. It's a
yeah.
pretty cool way to end the movie. And you can almost kind of look over that because you're still kind of caught up in what you just watched.
Hmm.
But I do think that's neat as well. We see Leia, kind of like you said, she's force sensitive, but it's almost like it's a soft side of Vader when he's talking to Luke after they're gone and they talk through the force as well.
Yeah, I think there is probably some desperation in Vader to somehow get Luke to listen, right? Because obviously Luke just jumped down this massive
Shoot.
shaft to presumably fall to his death, right? Instead of joining him. And so now that he knows he's alive, I mean, Vader's got to figure out some way to get him to listen, right? And so he is, right. He's like, listen, this is right. Like, it's me. And then we see Leia in the mix too. So it is kind of cool how it narrows in on the Skywalkers right at the end of this movie, and kind of closes out with that trio at the focus of what's going on here.
Yeah. And wrapping up episode 5, we talked about this earlier. there's no hope. Like the good guys lose every step of the way, and somehow when
All
this
of it.
movie ends, you don't even have a clue. You're like, man, they've got a fighting chance with this, and they just they get whipped. Like Hans and
Yeah.
Carbonite, Luke's lost his hand. The rebels have had their base attacked. They
Yeah.
have done nothing good in this
Yeah.
movie, and
No, the
somehow
Empire's having a party.
it still ends with everyone thinking, man, they still have a chance. It's like they shouldn't, but they do. So it's cool
Yeah.
how it's such a dark movie that doesn't necessarily feel like it's such a dark movie as a whole.